The purpose of this video is to do some quick cleanup and cover a couple things in Valhalla that I didn't have time to discuss in my previous video. So we're going to look at 3 topics. First, the 3 bonus memories that you can only reach after beating the main storyline. Second, we're going to talk about Mimir and Sigrun's story in Valhalla. And finally, I want to examine how Tyr's character is portrayed in this DLC, and how it differs from Odin's impersonation in the main game. Alright, let's start with a brief recap. In the main storyline of Valhalla, Kratos is offered the official position of God of War in the Norse pantheon by Freya. He is hesitant to accept because he is still troubled by his past mistakes, and is afraid of regressing into his old monstrous self again. However, after a bit of battle therapy with Tyr, the real Tyr this time, he confronts some of his worst sins, chooses to believe in the possibility of being a better version of himself, and becomes the new God of War, therefore finally making the series title make sense again. Yippee! Hooray! After the credits roll, the player can continue running through Valhalla to unlock a bit of bonus story content, where Kratos will confront 3 more memories from his past. These are the boat captain from the first game, his choice to leave his daughter Calliope in the afterlife back in Chains of Olympus, and finally some recollections of his rarely discussed first wife, Lysandra. First, I want to ask you a question. Why did the writers choose these 3 specific memories? They could have chosen anything. There is a huge number of moments in his life that are all equally worth confronting and discussing. For example, I was really hoping we would hear some discussion about Athena. Kratos' relationship with Athena was easily his most significant relationship in the original trilogy. She appeared on screen more often than any other Greek god. She was his patron deity, his benefactor, his protector, his guide, and yet her influence was ultimately corrosive. She set him on the path towards making many of his worst mistakes, whether that was her intention or not. A lot of his slaughter and carnage was committed with her blessing. And even more interesting, unlike most of the Greek gods who appeared in the original trilogy, Athena's spirit is presumably still around, still wandering the earth. She and Kratos could meet again. So I am extremely curious to know what this older and wiser Kratos thinks about her now. We did get a tiny bit of his thoughts back in God of War 4 when he sees her apparition and he tells her, "I am no longer your monster." But I want to know more. Does Kratos believe that Athena was always manipulating him? That she was selfish and greedy all along, just serving her own purposes? Athena's motivations were always enigmatic. She sacrifices herself to save Zeus in God of War 2, then immediately afterwards assists Kratos in his quest to destroy Zeus in God of War 3. Like, what's up with that? But the writers didn't choose to address this, or any of 100 other possibilities. Instead, they chose these 3 specific memories. So, why? Well, let's start with the boat captain. Kratos meets the boat captain right at the very start of the first game, and their interactions really set the tone for the entire series. It showed us what kind of games these were going to be. It defined who Kratos was as a character. Kratos is tasked by Poseidon with killing a Hydra that has been terrorizing the Aegean Sea. As his title suggests, the boat captain was the captain of a boat, which was being attacked by the Hydra. During the battle, the captain is actually swallowed by the Hydra. Luckily, Kratos slays the beast and then leaps down its throat. And let's watch a short cutscene to see what happens next.
Thank you! Thank the gods you came back for me!
I didn't come back for you.
No!
As I said before, this was a defining moment for the series. I remember when I first watched this when I was like 12 years old and being totally shocked. I'd never seen anything like this in a video game before. I don't think I'd ever encountered a true anti-hero. I had never considered the possibility of a video game protagonist who doesn't always try to do the right thing, who isn't a goody two-shoes, who would casually throw this random person down a Hydra's throat for no reason at all. I grew up on Nintendo games. God of War was something very different. I honestly thought it was awesome, but it does not end there. Later in the game, Kratos is killed by Ares and thrown down into the underworld. And watch what happens.
Kratos fell into the underworld, The river Styx beckoning below. The currents strong enough to carry even the strongest mortal to his eternal resting place. But Kratos had no intention of resting yet. He intended to live, to return to Earth and complete his quest.
Let go, fool! You won't drag me down to that cursed river!
There is a task left for me above. I will see it completed.
You again?
That's right, Kratos kills this dude a second time, and again, for no reason. Why does he stab him in the back here? It's so unnecessary. I do still think there is something hilarious about this second encounter, but on the whole, as an adult, my feelings about this have changed. If this game was released today, I wouldn't be nearly as interested in Kratos, which seemed exciting and new when I was 12, but now in my 30s it feels a little silly. The violence here is ultimately shallow. I mean, I still really like the first God of War. It's probably my second favorite game in the whole series, but it's definitely a product of its time. And the really extraordinary thing about the God of War franchise is the way it has evolved over time. God of War is not stuck in 2005. It has been adapting and changing with every release. Kratos, the character, has grown up along with his audience. A lot of us were probably kids when we first played God of War, but now we're adults, we've matured, our perspective has changed. So it is really satisfying to see that Kratos has matured too. That's why the writers chose this moment, because it's so iconic and at the same time shows how much Kratos' character has changed. That he can look back at this moment and say, yeah, that was pretty dumb. Helping the boat captain would have cost me nothing. My actions were needlessly and pointlessly cruel. The next two memories are a bit different, because they deal with his late wife and daughter, the ones he himself was tricked by Ares into mistakenly murdering back in the first game. I think the writers chose these because Lysandra and Calliope have, so far, been very absent from the series. I mean, of course they're dead, but also Kratos never ever speaks about them in the present. The only time he ever mentioned them in Ragnarok was when he was telling Freya about his past during their journey together in Vanaheim, and even then he only gave the bare facts of the situation. He didn't talk about his thoughts or feelings or any details about who his wife and daughter were as people. And so this bonus dialogue in Valhalla finally gives him a chance to do that, to reflect, to share his memories of them. We start with his daughter Calliope. Kratos tells a story about how after her death, he actually met her in the afterlife, then was forced to make the terrible choice to abandon her again, a choice he deeply regrets, because of course he wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. As Kratos was telling the story, I was like, what the heck is this guy talking about? I don't remember that happening at all. And it turns out that this occurred in God of War Chains of Olympus, which is a game I had never played because I never owned a PSP. So just for this video, I finally played it, so I could see this scene and the surrounding story for myself. And I gotta say, pretty good game. I think it ranks kind of high in the series for me. Persephone is a really good villain, actually a more interesting character than either Ares or Zeus. Someday I will do a full deconstruction of villainy on her. Anyway, because I suspect I'm not alone here, and there are probably a lot of other people who have never played Chains of Olympus, I figured I would share with you the cutscene where Kratos has to choose to leave Calliope, so here it is.
Elysium falls to Kratos. She will perish.
No! I will not let the gods take her from me again!
Father!
The choice was clear to him, yet impossible to make. To stay with his daughter meant the end of the world and the end of her. To stop Persephone and Atlas would mean forsaking his daughter forever. While his hatred and anger for the gods grew ever stronger, he knew there was but one thing to do.
Father, please! Please!
moment, Kratos knew his destiny was not with Calliope. The fates were never that kind.
Okay, so yeah, pretty brutal. Not only does he have to choose to abandon her, but he has to physically shove her away, and then leave her sobbing and crying. Now, this is messed up. The Greek gods put Kratos through a lot of BS, but I think this is actually the worst of it. This is an extremely traumatic and horrible situation. I can't believe I've never seen this before, because it definitely provides some important context for why his character ends up as angry and vicious as he does. I'm really glad the writers of Valhalla chose to address this moment, because now that I've seen it for myself, it's definitely crucial to his character. It's just an acknowledgement. I wish I could have stayed with her longer, but that he is able to speak about it at all is very valuable. Moving on, the discussion surrounding Lysandra is more challenging, because as far as I can remember, and do correct me if I'm wrong, unlike Calliope, Kratos' first wife never really appeared on screen in any significant way. She sort of appeared in God of War Ascension, but that was just an illusion perpetrated by the Furies. As a result of her lack of screen time, she's an almost entirely blank character. We just don't know very much about her. So here in Valhalla, what the writers are doing is essentially writing her character for the first time. Lysandra still doesn't appear in any cutscenes though. Instead, we learn of her character through Kratos' dialogue. In his description, she was someone who pushed him to be a better man, confronted him with the fact of his choices, and told him that he could make a different choice, advice he tragically ignored. Kratos compares Lysandra to La Fée, which is high praise. It is a simple character description delivered in just a handful of lines, but I think it's really worthwhile. Lysandra is a character I've always wanted to know more about, and was disappointed that the developers never gave her any role beyond being a plot point in Kratos' story. Lysandra should have her own story. She should be her own fully fleshed out character. And I think the writers of Valhalla felt the same way. They wanted to try to do justice to her character too, and I appreciate what they're trying to do here. Okay, so that concludes the discussion of Kratos' 3 bonus memories in Valhalla. Next, I want to talk about Mimir and Sigrun, because their relationship gets a bit of extra story in this update too. Mimir and Sigrun have a very cute, if sort of random, relationship in Ragnarok. In Valhalla, this relationship is developed further. At first, I assumed this was just going to be a little bit of fan service, a couple cutesy moments together sprinkled here and there. But the writers of God of War seem to very intentionally resist telling simple stories, and so the story of their relationship doesn't get to be simple either. At the start of Valhalla, their relationship is already a little rocky. Turns out that Sigrun did finally confess her feelings to Mimir, but he did not exactly reciprocate. He expressed doubts as to whether he could ever be enough for her, since, he's just a disembodied head. If this were a simpler story, they would have had a discussion about it. Sigrun would proclaim that the passion of love is not limited by one's number of functional limbs or vital organs, and then they'd profess their undying love for each other and live happily ever after, etc. But in Valhalla, their story goes in a very different direction. A little bit ago, I talked about how I felt that Lysandra deserves to be the main character of her own story. Not that I think she should have been the main character of God of War's story, but that in good fiction, every character should feel like they are on their own personal journey, even if they're the villain in our story. Something the writers did a fantastic job of doing with Baldur and Odin. And in Valhalla, Sigrun stops being merely a background character in Kratos' story, or merely a love interest in Mimir's story, and becomes the main character in her own personal story. Let's watch the cutscene where that transition occurs together. Here it is.
So this is it then?
For now. For however long.
Good. I mean, I'll miss you more than I can say, but whatever we ever were, or weren't, or might have been if the timing weren't just so... I need you to know that it mattered. All of it. Knowing you helped make me a person I can stand to be. And all I want for you in exchange is... everything.
I can't imagine a world in which I don't end up very close with you, my love. But let me come back to you whole. Let me come back not needing anyone to tell me what I need to be happy.
I can't begrudge you getting to know yourself. After all, It's been one of the great pleasures of my life.
Farewell, Sigrun, and good luck.
Thank you, Kratos. Farewell, my friends.
Fair winds, my love.
Something about the writing of these two Norse games that I've been especially impressed with is the character development, and especially the way the writers take some of these minor or supporting characters and give them so much life and personality. Like, back in God of War 4, I thought Brok and Sindri were likable but not hugely interesting. Then, in Ragnarok, Brok and Sindri are written beautifully, gorgeously, with so much pathos. They've transformed into some of the most compelling characters I've ever seen anywhere. And I can see in this scene that the writers are attempting to do something similar with Sigrun. Now, I don't think they're quite as successful as they were with Brok and Sindri. Of course, that's largely a fault of screen time. Brok and Sindri had the benefit of hours and hours of being on screen. Lots of dialogue, lots of time to develop and complicate their characters, to get the audience to fall in love with them both. Sigrun doesn't have that benefit, so the writers are trying to pack a lot into a short space. Something that is interesting to me is that Sigrun's story in Ragnarok is ending in the exact same way that Atreus' story ended, which is to say that it hasn't really ended at all. At the end of Ragnarok, Atreus departed on a new journey. Sigrun is doing the same thing. The two farewell scenes even mirror each other in a lot of ways. Atreus' goodbye to Kratos and Angrboda parallels Sigrun's goodbye to Freya and Mimir. They're so similar that it does make me wonder if the writers are setting something up here. We have two characters both leaving Midgard at about the same time, both going on personal journeys of discovery to faraway lands. It begs the question, are Atreus and Sigrun's stories going to intersect at some point in the future? Either way, I am really curious to see where both of these characters end up. Mimir has a bit of development in Valhalla as well. Every time Mimir disappears and is replaced by Helios, Mimir is actually experiencing his own version of Valhalla, reliving his own memories, and specifically reliving a telling of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, with himself in the role of Puck. It seems to me that Mimir's story here is focused on the theme of love, on examining what the true meaning of love is. According to Valhalla, love is not blind, obsessive devotion, and love is not about how someone else makes you feel. Love is not selfish. Instead, love is about caring for another person, caring for their feelings and what they need. A realization that allows Mimir to accept Sigrun's departure. But now let's move on to the final section of this video. Now let's talk about Tyr. The real Tyr's characterization is dramatically different than Odin's impersonation of him, and there are a lot of differences that we could point out, but the most notable one to me was curiosity. The real Tyr is a fundamentally curious character. Much of his dialogue in Valhalla consists of asking questions. Over and over again, he asks Kratos for more information about his past, more details about what drove his choices. Tyr is making a genuine effort to understand who Kratos really is, underneath all the slaughter, underneath all the guilt, all the stoicism, and he very rarely ever outright says anything like, okay, this is who you are, and this is why you did that, and this is what you should do next. He does not try to define Kratos or box him in. He just keeps asking thoughtful questions, gently probing, offering new possibilities, exploring the complexity of the situation. This fundamental curiosity gives the real Tyr a powerful presence on screen that Odin's impersonation never had. The real Tyr comes across as wise, mindful, deliberate, very careful with his words and actions, someone who cares about others, who cares about the world around him. Can you remember a single time when Odin's impersonation of Tyr ever asked anyone a meaningful question? A time when he really tried to get to know or get close to any of the other characters in Sindri's home? Of course not, because Odin did not care about other people. It's why his manipulations were so useless with Kratos and Freya, why he never could have predicted that Brok would see through his disguise, because he never truly understood any of those other characters. He never even tried to. The fascinating thing is that you could almost be tricked into thinking that curiosity was also central to Odin's character, but the real Tyr shows just how shallow and limited that curiosity was. A certain obsession with knowledge was definitely central to Odin's character. It drove everything he did. More than anything, he wanted to tear open that glowing seam, to take the answers that lay within for himself. As I discussed in my analysis video on Odin, what he really cared about though was power. For him, knowledge was power. It wasn't about wisdom or curiosity, it was about possession. The key difference between Odin and Tyr is that Odin tried to know, whereas Tyr tries to understand. For Odin, knowledge was the destination, or maybe a means to a destination. For Tyr, it seems more as if knowledge is truly a pursuit, not something that can ever be totally achieved, something you're ever done with, but something you can always get better at. You can always learn more. I'm really happy that the writers took this opportunity to develop Tyr's character, because he turned out to be really fascinating, and I'd like to see more of him in the future. Similar to Sigrun, I'd like to see him move out of just being a supporting role in Kratos' story and become the hero of his own story. But that is where this video is going to end. To be honest, it's gone on a bit longer than I thought it would, but the more I dug into Valhalla's story, the more layers I found. After this, I'm actually going to be taking a break from God of War for a while. I'd like to look at a couple other games in the meantime, starting with a few more essays discussing The Last of Us, because I just finished another replay, and there's always more to say about Joel and Ellie. When I do return to God of War, it will be with a new video focused on Sindri, so look forward to that whenever it comes around.